The wind carried the scent of dust and pine through the narrow valley that cradled the small town of Dry Creek. It was late spring of 1887, and the sun hung low over the hills, turning the sky a burnt orange that stretched far beyond the grazing fields. The world here moved slow, the kind of slow that made time feel thick, like honey poured over warm bread. Horses clopped over dirt streets, storekeepers swept wooden porches, and somewhere down by the creek, a harmonica played a tune too lonely for its own good. Everyone in Dry Creek knew the rancher who lived 3 miles west, just past the cottonwood grove and the split-rail fence. He was a quiet man, not old, but carved by wind and work into someone who looked like he belonged to the land itself. Folks just called him the rancher. Nobody knew much about his past, only that he'd shown up 10 years ago with little more than a wagon, a half-starved horse, and a look that said he'd lost more than he cared to tell. Since then, he'd built the largest spread of cattle this side of the river. He didn't talk much, didn't visit town unless he had to, and when he did, people stepped aside, and not out of fear but respect. That morning, the rancher had ridden into town earlier than usual, his hat pulled low and dust clinging to his coat. He stopped in front of the blacksmith's shop, where the smell of iron and smoke drifted thick through the air. The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man with a kind grin, looked up from his work and nodded. "Morning," he called out, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're out early." "Got fences down near the south ridge," the rancher replied, voice low. "Need to fix 'em before the cattle stray too far." The blacksmith leaned on his hammer. "You'll be needing more wire." The rancher nodded, "and something else." He hesitated, glancing toward the back of the shop where the forge glowed red. "I'm fixing up the barn. Door won't close right. Hinges bent, and the frame's too small for the new one I made." The blacksmith chuckled. "Too small, huh? Should have measured twice before cutting." The rancher gave the faintest smile. "Didn't have time. Storm last week near tore the whole thing off." The blacksmith motioned toward a younger helper to fetch a few tools. "Well, let's take a look at what you've got. Bring that piece over." The rancher pulled a bundle from his saddle, rough-hewn wood, hand-shaped and sanded smooth. He laid it on the workbench, and the blacksmith squinted, tapping the edge with a finger. "Fine work," he said. "But you're right, she's too small for the old frame. Won't fit easy." The rancher studied it quietly, his eyes narrow beneath the brim of his hat. "It'll fit," he said softly. The blacksmith gave him a long look, half teasing, half curious. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," the rancher said. "It'll fit just fine." There was something in his tone, steady but burdened, like he wasn't just talking about a door. The blacksmith didn't press further. He'd known the rancher long enough to understand that most of what he said had two meanings, one for the world to hear, and one he kept buried deep where no one could reach. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling loose boards along the street. A stagecoach rolled past, kicking up dust that drifted like a thin ghost through town. A young woman stepped off the coach, her long skirt brushing the ground, her hands clutching a small carpet bag. She looked lost for a moment, scanning the unfamiliar faces, until her gaze caught on the rancher standing in front of the blacksmith's shop. He didn't see her at first, didn't notice the way her eyes softened or how her breath caught when she saw him. But when he finally turned, something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe disbelief. It had been years since he'd seen her, too many years to count, yet here she was, standing in the same dusty town where they'd once said things they never should have. The last time they'd spoken, it had been near the river, beneath the tall cottonwoods. She'd said she was leaving, that she couldn't live the kind of life he'd chosen. The solitude, the endless miles of silence. He hadn't stopped her. He'd just watched as she walked away, her figure fading between the trees until only the sound of her footsteps remained. Now she stood before him again, older, maybe stronger, but with the same light in her eyes that had haunted him all these years. The blacksmith, sensing the quiet tension between them, busied himself with his tools and pretended not to notice. The rancher stepped forward slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. She smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to come." The air between them felt heavy, like the world had forgotten to move. He wanted to ask her why she'd returned, but something in her face told him it wasn't just for a visit. The dust swirled at their boots, and somewhere down the street a bell rang, the church bell calling folks to midday prayer. "I heard you've done well," she said quietly. "Big ranch now, lots of land," he nodded. "Enough to keep busy." Her eyes flicked toward his hands, rough, scarred, still calloused from the years. "You always like to keep busy." There was silence again, the kind that carried unspoken words. He looked at her, then at the bag in her hand. "You staying long?" "I don't know," she said. "Depends if I find what I came for." He waited, but she didn't explain. She just smiled, small, almost sad, and turned toward the inn down the street. The rancher watched her go until the swinging door closed behind her. Then he turned back to the blacksmith, who was pretending to hammer something he hadn't needed to touch in 5 minutes. "Old friend?" the blacksmith asked casually. "Something like that," the rancher said. The rest of the afternoon passed slow. The rancher loaded the wire onto his horse and rode home as the sky deepened into gold. But his thoughts weren't on the fences or the barn door anymore. They were on her, the woman who'd once told him she couldn't love a man who belonged to the land more than to her. When he reached the ranch, the sun was nearly gone. The barn loomed quiet against the horizon, half-shadowed, half-lit by the dying light. He dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped inside. The scent of hay and cedar filled the air. He ran his hand along the new door frame, then lifted the piece of wood he'd brought from town. It was still too small. He could see it now. No matter how he angled it, no matter how he pressed, it wouldn't fit right. He stood there for a long time, the silence thick around him. Then he set the wood down, leaned against the wall, and looked toward the darkening fields. Somewhere out there, coyotes were calling. Maybe tomorrow he'd make it fit. Maybe tomorrow he'd fix the door, mend the fence, and figure out why she'd come back. But tonight, all he could think of was her voice, soft and uncertain, the way she used to whisper his name like it was something fragile. The wind blew through the open doorway, carrying the scent of rain. He looked at the gap in the frame, at the space that refused to close, and for a moment, he wondered if some things weren't meant to fit perfectly after all. Then a light appeared far down the trail, a lantern moving slow through the dark, coming toward the ranch. He straightened, heart thudding, unsure if it was her or something else entirely. Either way, he stayed where he was, waiting in the half-light, as the sound of approaching footsteps broke the stillness of the night. The lantern light swayed gently in the distance, cutting through the dark like a slow heartbeat. The rancher stood still by the barn door, one hand resting on the wooden frame, eyes fixed on that faint glow moving closer along the dirt trail. The crickets had gone quiet, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He could hear the faint crunch of boots against gravel, the sound steady, unhurried. Whoever it was knew the way well enough not to rush. As the figure drew near, the rancher recognized the shape of a small horse and the familiar tilt of its rider. It was her, the woman from town. Her lantern swung from the saddle horn, throwing long shadows across the ground. She stopped a few feet from the barn, her face lit by the soft flicker of the flame. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I figured you might still be awake," she said, her voice carrying a mix of calm and unease. He nodded once, stepping forward. "Couldn't sleep." She dismounted, her boots crunching against the dry earth. "I thought I should come out here," she said. "There's something you need to know." The rancher studied her face. The years hadn't taken her beauty, just softened it, made it quieter somehow, like the light of an old lantern instead of the blaze of a new fire. "You could have said it in town," he said. "I couldn't," she whispered. "Not there." He waited, but she didn't speak again right away. Instead, she looked toward the house, the old wooden structure standing dark against the horizon. "You still live alone?" she asked. "Always have," he said. She gave a small nod, like that answer hurt more than she wanted to admit. Then she looked back at him, eyes glistening slightly in the lantern light. "You remember the day I left?" "Hard to forget," he said quietly. She took a breath, her fingers tightening around the handle of the lantern. "That day I wasn't just leaving you. I was running from something, someone," he frowned. "Who?" she hesitated. "A man. He came to Dry Creek a few weeks before I left. Said he was looking for work, but that wasn't true. He was looking for me." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Why?" She glanced toward the dark hills. "Because of something I knew. Something I saw. Back then I didn't think it would follow me. I thought if I disappeared it'd end. But I was wrong." The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain and sagebrush. The rancher could feel the weight behind her words. He didn't know the whole story yet, but whatever it was, it hadn't let her rest. "Does he know you're back?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "I've been careful, but men like him, they always find a way." He stepped aside and motioned toward the barn. You can stay here for the night. Safer than town. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening with gratitude. Thank you. He led her inside, lighting another lantern and setting it on the workbench. The barn felt warmer now, filled with the smell of hay and old wood. Her gaze moved across the stalls, the tools. The saddle hung neatly on its rack. You've kept everything the same, she said. Not much reason to change, he replied. For a moment, there was silence again. She placed her lantern down and ran her hand along the beam near the door, the same door he'd tried to fix earlier. Still doesn't fit, she murmured. He looked at the frame, then at her. Not yet, she smiled faintly, a sadness behind it. Some things take time. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the plains. The rancher poured her some water from a tin jug and handed it over. She took it with a quiet thank you, her hands trembling slightly. You said someone's after you, he said after a moment. You expect him soon? She shook her head. He doesn't rush things. He waits. Watches. That's what makes him dangerous. The rancher leaned against the post, thinking. Then we'll keep watch too. She looked up, surprised. You'd help me? After all these years? He met her gaze. You didn't come back here by accident. Whatever brought you back, maybe it's time to face it. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then she nodded. You always did believe in facing things head on. The storm broke not long after. Rain came down in steady sheets, drumming against the roof and running in silver lines down the barn door. Lightning flashed far off, lighting the fields in brief white bursts. They sat on overturned crates near the workbench, the lantern flickering between them. Tell me about him, the rancher said. She drew in a deep breath. He worked for the railroad. Or at least that's what he said. But the truth is, he was hired by men who didn't want the railroad here. Men who wanted the land instead. I saw them sign papers, make deals that would leave whole families with nothing. I spoke up once and he warned me to stay quiet. When I didn't, he made sure I disappeared. The rancher's eyes darkened. And now? Now the railroad's coming through Dry Creek again, she said. And those same men and or their kind are back. I think they know I'm here. He nodded slowly, piecing it together. You think he's with them? I think he never left, she said quietly. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. The barn trembled faintly with each boom. You should stay in the house, he said finally. It's safer than out here. I'll be fine here, she said softly. I don't want to be a burden. He stood, brushing the dust from his coat. Ain't a burden if you need help. She looked up at him. Something unspoken passing between them. Not quite forgiveness. Not yet love, but something fragile and real. As the rain fell harder, the lantern flickered low, and their voices faded into the rhythm of the storm. Hours passed before the wind began to settle. The rancher had fallen quiet, lost in thought, his mind turning over her words again and again. The railroad, the man, the warning. He finally rose and went to the door, peering out into the night. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the moon was breaking through thin clouds. That's when he saw it. A faint glimmer of light far down by the ridge. Not lightning this time, but firelight. Someone had a camp out there. He turned back toward her. You see that? She came to his side, following his gaze. Her face went pale. That's him, she whispered. You sure? I'd know that light anywhere. He used to burn the same kind of lantern. Silver rim, cracked glass. The rancher's hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning by the stall, though he didn't lift it. He's closer than I thought. She stepped back, fear flickering across her face. What will you do? He kept his eyes on the horizon. Wait, if he's come this far, he'll show himself soon enough. The night stretched long and tense. The two of them stood by the open door, watching that flickering light down the ridge. It didn't move, just burned steady. A silent warning that the past had finally caught up. When dawn came, the light was gone. The fields were slick with dew, the sky pale and cold. But the tracks in the mud told the truth. Fresh boot prints leading up from the ridge, then veering off toward the creek. He was here, the rancher said quietly. Watched us all night. She looked at the prints, then at him. He'll come back. I know. They both stood there for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down like the heavy morning fog. Somewhere behind them, a horse whinnied softly and the sound echoed through the still air. You still got that courage you had back then? He asked finally. She looked at him, eyes steady now. More than I did before, he gave a faint nod. Good, you'll need it. As the sun began to rise, spilling light over the fields, the rancher knew things were changing. Dry Creek wasn't as quiet as it used to be. Trouble was coming, and this time it wasn't just his to face. He glanced once more toward the distant ridge, then back at her. "Whatever he wants, we'll find out soon enough," he said. She didn't answer, just looked toward the hills where the mist hung low, hiding what waited beyond. The land felt different now, uneasy, alive. Somewhere out there, the man from her past was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And deep down, the rancher knew that when he finally came, nothing in Dry Creek would ever be the same again. The morning after the storm, Dry Creek woke under a dull gray sky. The town still glistened from the night's rain, puddles scattered like small mirrors across the road. The rancher rode in just after sunrise, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning everything. The saloon porch, the old general store, the silent front of the blacksmith shop. There was a feeling in the air, heavy and strange, like the quiet before a gunshot. He tied his horse outside the post office and stepped inside. The mail clerk, a thin man with a handlebar mustache, looked up from behind the counter. "Mornin', rancher," he said. "Didn't expect you so early. Got any mail for me?" The clerk rummaged through a few envelopes, then shook his head. "Nothing today. You looking for something special?" "Just keeping an eye out," the rancher said, his voice flat. "Anyone new come through town lately?" The clerk paused. "Couple fellas last night. Said they were surveyors. Claimed they were working for the railroad, but they didn't have the look of it." "Where'd they head?" "Rented a room over at the old boarding house. Been asking around about land rights, cattle routes, who owns what. Didn't seem too friendly about it neither." The rancher gave a slow nod, thanked the man, and walked back outside. The mud squished under his boots as he crossed the street toward the saloon. He pushed the swinging doors open, and the smell of whiskey and stale smoke met him like an old memory. A few men sat at tables, playing cards or nursing drinks. The bartender looked up from polishing a glass. "You're out early," he said. "Need a word," the rancher said quietly. The bartender leaned in. "About the new men? You seen 'em?" "Last night. Didn't talk much. Just watched. Paid for whiskey and gold, which is strange for surveyors." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Where are they now?" The bartender motioned upstairs. "Room 3. They're still up there, I reckon. Didn't hear 'em leave." The rancher turned to go but stopped when he caught sight of the sheriff walking in. The sheriff was a broad man with tired eyes and a badge that looked like it had seen better days. He nodded toward the rancher. "Heard you're asking questions." "I've got reason," the rancher said. "So do I," the sheriff replied. "Word is someone's been sneaking around your ranch at night. You know anything about that?" The rancher met his eyes. "Maybe. Whoever it was, they left tracks near the creek." The sheriff rubbed his chin. "You think it's them?" "I don't think," the rancher said. "I know," the sheriff sighed. "Then we best be careful. Railroad men bring trouble, the kind that don't ask for permission." The rancher nodded and stepped aside, letting the sheriff take the lead. Together, they climbed the stairs to the boarding house rooms above the saloon. The hallway was quiet, save for the sound of dripping water from a leak in the roof. They stopped in front of room 3. The sheriff knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, he pushed the door open. The room was empty. Bed unmade, window open, curtains blowing gently in the breeze. On the table sat a half-smoked cigar and a folded map. The rancher picked it up, spreading it open. It showed the railroad line stretching through Dry Creek, and his ranch land marked in red ink. "They're planning something," the rancher said. "Looks that way," the sheriff replied. "And it ain't just about land. Someone's buying out the valley, or scaring folks off it." The rancher folded the map and tucked it into his coat. "Then I'll find out who's paying them." The sheriff placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, friend. Men like this don't scare easy, and they sure don't forgive." The rancher didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Back at the ranch, the woman was waiting by the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cold wind. She looked up when she saw him riding in, worry etched across her face. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. He dismounted and handed her the map. "They're after the land, all of it. And someone's funding it. The same kind of men who used to follow that railroad agent you told me about." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "I told you he wouldn't stop. He knows this land connects everything. The water, the routes, the cattle drives. Whoever owns it controls half the county. Then he's not just coming for you," the rancher said. He's coming for everyone. That night, the tension settled thick over the ranch. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the loose boards of the barn. The cattle were restless, snorting and shifting in the pen. Somewhere out in the distance, a coyote cried, long and sharp. The rancher stood watch by the barn, rifle in hand. The woman brought him coffee, her hands trembling as she passed the tin cup. "You think they'll come tonight?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Men like that don't wait long once they've been seen." She stayed beside him, silent for a while, watching the dark stretch of land beyond the fence. "Do you ever wish you'd left this place?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "This land's all I've got. It's not perfect, but it's mine." She looked down. "I used to think leaving meant freedom. Now I see it just means running." He turned to her, his voice soft. "You came back for a reason. Maybe this time you don't have to run." Before she could answer, a sound broke the stillness, the faint crack of a twig from the tree line. The rancher froze. Another sound followed, boots against wet earth. He motioned for her to stay low and stepped out into the open yard, rifle raised. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. Only the wind. Then a voice, rough, mocking, floated through the dark. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" The woman's eyes went wide. She knew that voice. The rancher held steady. "Show yourself." A shadow moved between the trees, then another. 3 men stepped out, their coats dark and slick with rain, each one carrying a rifle. The one in front smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Been a long time," he said, glancing toward the woman. "Didn't think you'd come back here." She stepped forward, anger in her voice. "You shouldn't have followed me." He tilted his head. "You saw something you shouldn't have. You talked when you should have stayed quiet. Now you're back where you started." The rancher took a step closer, rifle still steady. "You got 5 seconds to get off my land." The man laughed low. "Your land?" "Not for long." Before he could say more, the sheriff's voice rang out from the shadows behind them. "Drop the guns." The men spun around, startled. The sheriff and 2 deputies stepped from the brush, their rifles aimed. The leader sneered but lifted his hand slightly. "This isn't over," he said, eyes locking on the rancher. "You can't stop what's coming. The railroad's already bought the town." The sheriff moved in, cuffing one of the men as the others were disarmed. But the leader didn't resist, just smiled, calm and sure of himself. "You'll see soon enough," he whispered. By morning they were locked in the town jail. But the rancher couldn't shake the man's words. Bought the town. It meant the fight wasn't just here, it was everywhere. Later that day, as the sun rose over the hills, smoke appeared on the horizon. Not from chimneys, but from the direction of the valley. The woman came running from the barn. "The North Ridge, it's burning!" The rancher grabbed his hat and rifle, swinging into the saddle. "They're trying to drive us out," he said. She reached for his arm. "Be careful," he gave her a steady look. "I always am." He rode hard toward the ridge, the air thick with smoke and heat. The fire crackled across the dry grass, spreading fast. But what caught his eye wasn't the flames. It was the figures riding away on the other side. Men with torches, disappearing toward the canyon. He stopped his horse at the ridge's edge, staring at the blackened ground below. This wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a warning. When he returned to the ranch that evening, the sky had turned red again with sunset. The woman stood by the fence, her face pale, eyes wide. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but neither am I." Somewhere behind them, thunder rumbled again, distant, rolling, like the start of another storm. And both of them knew that whatever was coming next would decide not just the fate of the ranch, but the soul of Dry Creek itself. The days that followed felt longer than any the rancher could remember. Every sunrise brought a new unease, cattle wandering restless, fences cut clean through the wire, and riders spotted along the far ridge who disappeared before anyone could reach them. The land, once quiet and steady, now felt watched. Even the wind carried tension with it, as if the hills themselves were waiting for something to break. The woman stayed close to the ranch house, keeping the lamps trimmed and curtains drawn at night. She'd stopped speaking much, her thoughts heavy and her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The memory of that night, the man's voice, his cruel smile, the fire, lingered in the silence between them. Every sound outside made her jump. Every creak of the board seemed like a footstep. The sheriff rode by most mornings, checking on them. "Town's changing fast," he told the rancher one afternoon. New faces everywhere. Folks coming in with papers saying they own things that ain't theirs. The railroad men? The rancher asked. The sheriff nodded. They've got the bank behind them now. Half the valley's already sold. The rancher leaned on the fence, jaw tight. And the ones who won't sell? They'll find ways to make them. That night, the rancher sat alone in the barn, oiling his rifle and staring into the dim lamplight. The woman appeared quietly at the doorway, her shadow long across the floor. You haven't slept, she said softly. He shook his head. Can't. Too much stirring out there. She stepped closer, folding her arms against the chill. They're not just after land. They're after control. The man I told you about, he used to say people were easier to break than fences. He looked up at her, his expression steady but weary. He's wrong about one thing. What's that? I don't break easy. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were sad. I know. The night grew colder. The lantern flickered low. Outside, a coyote howled from somewhere near the creek, and then another answered it, closer. The rancher rose, walked to the door, and peered into the dark. He thought he saw movement, a quick flash of something metallic. He motioned for her to stay put and stepped outside. The air smelled of smoke again, faint but real. He followed it past the fence, boots crunching through the wet grass. The moonlight caught on something near the water, a pile of kindling stacked low and hidden under brush. A fire trap. He crouched down to inspect it, but before he could move, a voice called out behind him. Don't bother putting it out. There's more where that came from. He turned slowly. 3 men stood by the edge of the trees, rifles slung over their shoulders. The leader, the same one from before, grinned through the shadows. You just don't quit, the man said. You think this little patch of dirt's worth dying for? The rancher rose, calm but firm. Ain't about the dirt, it's about what's right. The man chuckled low. Right doesn't buy railroads, doesn't feed cattle either. You're standing in the way of progress. I've seen your kind's progress, the rancher said. It burns everything it touches. The man's smile faded. Then maybe it's time we burned this too. The next moment came fast, the flash of a match, the hiss of fire catching dry grass. The rancher lunged forward, knocking the match from the man's hand as the others raised their guns. Shots rang out, echoing through the night. Sparks flew, dirt kicked up, and the horses in the pen screamed and scattered. The woman ran from the barn, shouting his name, but he waved her back. Get inside, he yelled. She froze, torn between fear and instinct. Then the sheriff's voice split the chaos. Drop your weapons. From the darkness behind the trees, the sheriff and 2 deputies appeared, guns drawn. The men hesitated, then turned and bolted toward the hills. The sheriff fired once, a warning shot, and the echo rolled across the open land like thunder. When it was over, smoke drifted over the creek, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The rancher stood still, breathing hard. The sheriff came up beside him, his hat tilted low. You all right? The rancher nodded. They were lighting fire traps, planned to burn us out. The sheriff sighed. They'll keep trying. Word's spreading that the company's sending more men. They're building something bigger, a station maybe, and they mean to clear every acre between here and the ridge. The woman joined them, her face pale but steady. Then it's starting, she said quietly. The same way it started before. The rancher looked at her, the weight of understanding settling in his chest. We need proof, something that ties him to the company. If we can show the town who's really behind it, maybe they'll stop running scared. She hesitated, then said, I might know where to find it. The sheriff frowned. Where? There's a ledger, she said, kept in the office of the old railway station. It has the names, the payoffs, the bribes. I saw it once before I left. He'd never destroy it. Men like him always keep records. The rancher glanced toward the hills, where the faint outline of the old railway shack sat abandoned. Then we go tonight, he said. The sheriff nodded grimly. You'll need help. I'll take help, the rancher said. But if we wait till morning, it'll be gone. So they rode out under the moonlight, the rancher, the sheriff, and the woman wrapped in her shawl, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The land stretched silent and empty, save for the rustle of dry grass and the distant cry of night birds. By the time they reached the old station, the wind had picked up again. The place looked worse than memory. Half-collapsed roof, windows broken, ivy climbing the walls. The wooden sign above the door still read, Dry Creek Junction, though the paint had long since peeled away. They dismounted quietly and slipped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and papers were scattered across the floor like forgotten leaves. "There," she whispered, pointing to a heavy desk in the corner. "He kept it locked under the drawer." The rancher knelt and pried it open with his knife. The wood splintered, and inside lay a thick leather book, edges worn, pages yellowed. He flipped it open, scanning quickly. There it was. Signatures, payments, land deeds, all under the same company name. Western Consolidated Rail and Land. He handed it to the sheriff. "This is it." Before the sheriff could reply, a floorboard creaked behind them. Then another. The woman's eyes widened. "Someone's here." The rancher turned slowly, rifle raised. From the shadows at the back of the station, a figure stepped forward. The man. His hat was gone, his face lit by the weak light from the doorway. "Told you before," he said softly. "You should have left well enough alone." Behind him, more men appeared, blocking the exit. 5 of them, maybe 6. The sheriff's hand went to his gun. The rancher's voice was calm. "You really think burning down a town's gonna make folks forget what you did?" The man smiled thinly. "It's not about forgetting. It's about replacing. Once the line's built, no one will care who lived here before. You'll just be a story." The sheriff lifted his revolver. "Then this story ain't over yet." The next moments blurred. A shout, the crack of gunfire, the splintering of wood. The air filled with smoke and dust. The woman ducked behind the desk as bullets tore through the walls. The rancher fired once, hitting one of the men in the shoulder, then swung toward the window, shattering it open for an escape. "Go!" he yelled. The sheriff covered him, returning fire. The woman grabbed the ledger, clutching it to her chest as they ran out into the night. The sound of horses and gunfire followed them into the open field. They reached the riverbank before stopping to breathe. The moonlight shimmered off the water, their breath misting in the cold air. The sheriff limped slightly, a graze across his arm, but he waved it off. "They'll come after us," the woman said. "They will," the rancher replied. "But now we've got something they can't afford to lose." From behind them, voices carried on the wind, angry, searching. The glow of lanterns moved closer, spreading across the dark like fireflies. The rancher checked his rifle, then turned to her. "If they find us, they'll take that book first. You have to keep it safe no matter what. I'm not leaving you," she said. He met her eyes, steady and certain. "This isn't about me. It's about what's right." She looked down, fingers tightening around the leather-bound ledger. The sheriff pointed toward the ridge. "There's an old mining tunnel up that way. You can hide till sunrise." The wind carried the sound of horses now. Closer, faster. The rancher turned back toward the station, where the glow of torches was already rising behind the trees. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet resolve. "They wanted a fight," he said. "Now they've got one." The woman reached out, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this alone." He gave her a faint, tired smile. "I never have." And with that, he stepped into the darkness, the echo of his boots fading into the roar of the coming storm. The woman stood there, clutching the ledger against her heart, as the night closed in and the distant gunfire began again. Louder this time, sharper, like the sound of a world about to change forever. The night passed heavy with gunfire and smoke. The woman waited by the ridge, hidden in the shadows of the old mining tunnel, holding the ledger tight against her chest. Every echo from the valley made her heart stop. She wanted to run down there to see if he was alive, but the sheriff's words stayed in her mind. "You can't help him if you're caught." The hours dragged by. The wind carried the smell of burned wood and dust, and the sky began to pale at the edges. When the first light of dawn broke over the hills, the sounds had gone quiet. No more shouting, no more shots. Only the faint hiss of dying embers somewhere below. The woman stepped out from hiding, her legs trembling. The world looked ghostly in the early light, patches of smoke still rising from the fields, the old station half collapsed and blackened from fire. She started down the hill slowly, careful not to draw attention, though everything was still. The sheriff's horse was gone. So were the others. When she reached the bottom, she found him sitting on the edge of the creek, his hat beside him, his rifle across his knees. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with soot, but he was alive. He looked up as she approached, his eyes tired yet calm. "You made it," she whispered. He nodded, his voice rough. "Barely." She knelt beside him, searching his face. "The sheriff?" "He's all right. Took a bullet through the arm, but he's alive. Rode to town with what's left of the evidence. Said he'd meet us there." She looked back toward the burnt remains of the station. "And them?" He sighed. "Some ran. Some didn't make it. The one who started all this, he's gone." Sheriff said the fire took him. Silence fell between them. The morning light stretched across the land, painting everything gold and still. The fight that had haunted them for years was over, but victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like something had been buried. Not just the man, but the part of the past that refused to let them rest. They rode into town later that morning. The people had gathered near the courthouse, whispering as the sheriff stood on the steps, holding the ledger in his good hand. The pages were spread open for everyone to see, the company's name, the payments, the bribes, the signatures. When he spoke, his voice carried across the crowd. "These papers show who's been behind the fires, the killings, the threats. The land you were forced to sell. It was stolen under false claim. The men who did this will answer for it." The townsfolk looked from the sheriff to the rancher and then to the woman beside him. For years they had been afraid to speak, afraid to fight back. But now, seeing proof in black ink and blood-stained paper, something in their faces changed, a spark of courage returning after a long sleep. A man in the crowd called out, "You telling us we can get our land back?" The sheriff nodded. "You can start by taking it back yourselves. No man owns what he took by fear." The people began to murmur. Not in panic this time, but with purpose. Some of them turned and walked toward the hills where their fences once stood, where their homes had been burned. The woman felt a tear slip down her cheek. For the first time in years, there was hope here. Later that afternoon, the rancher and the woman sat outside the livery stable, watching the town rebuild its rhythm. Children ran past with buckets of water, and a group of men worked to repair the church roof. It was a quiet, hopeful noise, the sound of life returning. The woman broke the silence first. "You could leave now," she said. "Start somewhere new. No one would blame you," he smiled faintly. "I could, but this land's in my blood, and now that it's free again, I reckon it deserves someone to look after it." She looked at him carefully. "And what about you? Don't you deserve peace?" He shrugged. "Maybe peace ain't about leaving. Maybe it's about staying and not running anymore." She smiled then, a small, weary smile that carried both sorrow and understanding. Days passed, and slowly the valley began to heal. Grass grew again where the fires had scorched the ground. The river, once muddy with ash, ran clear by the third week. People came together, fixing fences, planting seeds, rebuilding barns. The rancher helped where he could, but most evenings he would sit on the porch watching the horizon turn red with sunset. The woman often joined him, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting in silence. The sheriff came by one evening, his arm still bandaged, but his spirit lighter. "You ought to know," he said. "That ledger made it all the way to the state office. They're investigating the company now. Might be a while before we see justice, but it's coming." The rancher nodded. "That's enough for me." The sheriff tipped his hat toward the woman. "You did good. Without you, we wouldn't have had proof." She looked down, her voice soft. "I just wanted it to stop. For good." After the sheriff left, the rancher sat for a long while, staring at the stars coming out one by one. He thought about everything they had lost, the lives, the land, the years gone by in fear. But he also thought about what remained, honesty, courage, and a quiet strength that didn't burn out with the fire. The woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I first came here, I didn't think I'd stay. I didn't think anyone would want me to." He turned to her. "You're wrong about that." She met his eyes. "Why?" "Because this place needed someone who could see what others looked past. You did that. You reminded folks what home really means." She looked out toward the fields, where the wind moved through the tall grass like waves. "Home," she repeated softly, as if testing the word for the first time in years. Weeks turned to months. The valley grew greener, the sounds of hammering and laughter replacing the echoes of gunfire. The town had new life, the kind that came from unity, not fear. The sheriff organized meetings, the farmers shared supplies, and even the church bells, long silent, rang again one Sunday morning. The rancher's ranch became a gathering place, a spot for folks to talk, to plan, to start again. And every time someone asked how it all began, he'd just smile and say, "With the truth." One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in shades of copper and gold, the woman walked out to where the fence met the river. She stood there quietly, watching the water move slow and steady, carrying bits of the past away downstream. The rancher joined her after a while, his boots crunching softly on the dry earth. "Beautiful evening," he said. She nodded. "Feels like the world finally caught its breath." He looked at her then, really looked, not with pity or gratitude, but with the simple understanding that comes from surviving something together. "You think you'll stay?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "I think I already have." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and fresh rain. Somewhere in the distance a horse neighed, and the faint sound of a harmonica drifted from town. A soft, lonesome tune that somehow didn't sound lonely anymore. The rancher placed his hat back on his head and nodded toward the horizon. "Storm's moving east. Looks like we'll have rain tonight." "Good," she said. The land could use it. As they stood there side by side, the sky broke open with the first drops of rain. It came slow at first, then steady, washing the dust from the ground, cooling the air, filling the earth again. The woman closed her eyes, letting it fall on her face, and for the first time in years she felt clean, not just from the dirt and the fear, but from everything that had tried to bury her spirit. The rancher looked out across his land, his home, and saw not the scars of what was lost, but the promise of what could grow again. By the time the rain stopped, night had fallen. The two of them walked back toward the ranch house, their footsteps soft in the wet soil. The lamps in the windows glowed warm against the dark, and the sound of thunder rolled far in the distance, gentle and fading. The world was quiet again, not the uneasy quiet of waiting for trouble, but the kind that follows after something hard has finally ended. The rancher opened the door and looked back once at the valley, breathing in deep. "We made it," he said simply. The woman smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. "We did." And as the door closed behind them, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and wildflowers across the hills, the kind of smell that only comes when a place, and the people in it, have finally found peace.